Hi, my name is Nancy Humphreys, and I have the great pleasure today of interviewing for the Hall of Distinction Ellen Dunbar, a dear colleague and a good friend for many years. Ellen, how did you become a social worker?
How did I become a social worker? Well, I was looking for a job after I had taught high school home economics for 2 years.
Really?
And I was in Los Angeles without a job, and I found a job at El Calvario Community Center in El Monte as a group worker. So the executive for that agency, that program, had an MSW and was sure that I should go and get mine.
Wow. So, what were you were looking for a job. What are the things influenced you in the direction of social work?
Well, at that point, I had been teaching, so I really hadn't thought about social work, even though I had some contact with a person who was an MSW, and I had a college summer job in an orphanage, it was called then, near Chicago. But I hadn't really thought about being a social worker until I got that job. Mm-hmm. And then from there I went to graduate school.
Do you mind me asking what year that was that you got this job after you stopped teaching?
Yes, it was 1957.
So what was social work like, and what were the political and economic and social contexts?
It was much quieter then, and now this is post World War II. There was no women's movement. There was no civil rights movement. None of that was going on. The social work was. I got into group work because I had been working in a community center doing groups. So. But it was the political environment in social work was building a profession.
It was kind of the Eisenhower.
Yeah,
the Eisenhower.
Right,
years,
right.
Yeah, and how did your career develop? How did you started in this agency, and then you got your MSW, and then what happened?
Well, then I was hired by a very important man, George Nishinaka. The agency had been around for a while, and their tradition was working with teenagers in the Los Angeles area of East Watts and East Los Angeles. And he hired Alex Norman and I, both of us just out of graduate school, and there were 2 other group workers there, and we worked in East Los Angeles and Watts, and that was a very important point in my life. I mean, George was a fascinating person, and he was very committed to. People talked about multicultural. He was able to do it. He had multicultural staff. He had the services were that. I mean, he, in a way that didn't happen then, and you see some of that now, but not at that point. He also was thought NASW was very important. He really expected his staff to go ahead and get active, and then later on also to get active in some of the movements that went on. But so that was important beginning.
The name of the agency was?
Special Service for Groups. And it still exists, but it has changed in time. But it had been around for a long time then. Mm-hmm. It had started during the Zoot Suit riots.
Which were back in the 40s?
During the Second World War.
Wow. And what positions did you hold at SSG?
Well, I started as a group worker with the teenagers out in the communities, which I did for a couple of years, and then I became a supervisor, and then had graduate students.
You were a field instructor.
I was a field instructor. We had a whole group of graduate students who came for a while, and then the environment changed with the federal government beginning to have some money available, and so we changed from me doing direct work, but to work with the people in the community to build program proposals. Again, George Nishinaka was important because he would scout out, meet the federal people, find out who had money, and then, know where to connect so we could connect needs of the community with programs that were available.
My understanding was that you did a lot of grant writing for
That's right.
SSG, but grants based on involving the community itself, which was really kind of novel.
Absolutely, that's right. I worked with for example, there was a Sons of Watts organization that was organized with another great social worker, Billy Tidwell. Young man came out of Watts and got his MSW at Berkeley, and then came and he worked with Special Service for Groups for a short time, but in that time he helped the Sons of Watts get organized, which was a group of street guys. And then eventually he moved on, but I worked with them to write a couple of proposals for their organization to do something. So that was a very interesting time. At times, that was when the politics began to change, of course, with Johnson's administration. And another thing that was new then that I recall is that United Way would not allow their funds to be used to match federal funds from other areas. And George fought with the United Way for a while to get them to say, look, if we can use your funds, then we can expand it and get more money. And then finally he got some approval. Of course, that's the way it's done completely now. That's about the only way that private or local funds are used, is to match.
And I think it's safe to say that SSG innovated any number of things that have become very commonplace
probably
now, and so it's. I'm sure George would be very proud to see to hear SSG remembered in that fashion. When you left SSG, what positions followed? Where did you go from there? When did you leave SSG?
Well, I was there for 12 years, so that was quite a while. And then I got to be interested in going back to school. I started teaching part-time a little bit, and then I wanted to go on to school. And I wanted to do something that had to do with community development, community organization, corrections. So I went into an interdisciplinary program at USC, where there was a sociologist named Joan Moore, who had done her work with the juvenile gangs and published on that. And then there were economists and political scientists on the faculty. And I worked with Sam Taylor, who was the CO person at the School of Social Work. So I got this interdisciplinary degree studied for my dissertation, correctional reform, organizational change, basically, what that was.
When did you finish that program? What did you?
75.
And so then where did you?
So then I'm looking for a teaching job. Switch gears. I went to
went back to where you
started.
Yes,
that's it. Eastern Washington University was had a new graduate social work program led by a very, very competent rural social work authority. So I went back to my rural roots and went to work with John O'Neill and the faculty at Eastern Washington. Some of the faculty that they pulled together had actually started at Fresno State in their new rural social work program back then. So I ended up there for 10 years, where I taught community organization, social policy, field work, of course.
Weren't you the dean?
I was graduate director, and then for 1 year I was the interim dean while someone else was while John was on sabbatical, actually. I did it for a year. And then I started looking around for something else.
And so where did you go?
And, so my rural social work and street gang worker goes to the middle of California to NASW. It was kind of an unusual move.
Mm-hmm.
George thought that was a dumb move. But I was also recruited by our good friend Wanda Collins, who was going to be president and obviously wanted somebody she could count on in the executive job. And the California chapter was struggling at that point. In fact, I had been sent by the national office to go there and visit and see what they could do to get the chapter off its feet. It was not doing very well.
What was the struggle?
Well, their struggle with national had to do with finances, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Not surprising, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get into what their problems were. They're kind of petty, but I had actually done that before I even thought of even going there as the exec. But I went, and we had a couple of good staff people. Kathy Sutton was doing the lobbying work and is still a friend today. I could start going on and talking about NASW, but
So how long did you stay as executive?
I was 8 years there,
Right.
and I think maybe one of the things worth noting that I think was important was what we were trying to do legislation, and we don't have enough power base. We didn't have any power base really to work on legislation, and I thought the deans of schools of social work might be helpful in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And I inquired, and they did not have an organization, and they had one in the past, but they were not meeting. Hadn't met for years. So with the help of, first of all, Jim Kelly, he said, okay, I'll call a meeting. And then Harry Speck got involved, and Andy Dieppe, and restarted an organization of the deans and directors for California. So that was one thing I thought was very useful. Working with Harry Speck was fun.
It's been interesting.
I enjoyed
and
work.
fun.
And fun, yeah.
And fun. You had your career success. You had some pretty clear goals in terms of things you thought were important for a social worker to be committed to in terms of community change and the role of social work in corrections and so forth, and with an emphasis on attention to rural as well as urban issues. So what were some of the strategies excuse me, that you used in order to work on one or more of those goals?
Well, of course, the policy thing, in going to the NASW, I was able to be directly involved in some of the policy things and work with or help the lobbyists and members to participate. Not that they didn't do it before, but we'd had some good lobbyists and we'd had some quieter times. So that was one. I was getting social workers organized. Basically, that NASW job is to organize social workers. When I was in the rural communities, it was the opportunity to teach students to get involved in the community and the politics. And I've been politically active.
What kind of political activity?
Well, just plain old elect some good people at different levels.
So you've worked on campaigns?
And campaigns, yes. This is jumping to a different time, but where one of my first students at Stanislaus was a woman named Susan Eggman, who's now an Assemblywoman. She was with that first class and was kind of a protege, and she went on to run for and to become a state legislator. First a city councilwoman, then state legislature, and then her brother recently ran for Congress, not successfully at this point, but so I've worked on that campaign. So actually direct involvement, but getting students placed in United Way positions where they could work with communities was another strategy.
I should have asked a follow-up question because I know that you were very important to the creation of that program in Stanislaus and were the dean of the school for.
I can talk a little bit about how that got going. Marcina Buck, the mutual friend of ours, was the welfare director in Stanislaus County. And Dan Sousa was, I think he was the associate mental health director, and there was no MSW program there. It was very hard to find MSWs in the middle of the valley, even though there's several cities of over 100,000 people, and there are a lot of smaller cities, so there's a lot of social work, needed social work positions, but there was no graduate program. And Marcina was working with the university to try to help getting it going, and Fresno had worked with them. People from Fresno had tried, but they had not been successful. And so I remember the phone call with Marcina talking about this, and I was looking to move. I was ready to leave NASW. So I said, well, what about me? He said, oh, that's a great idea. And that's what it developed. Eventually I went down there, and they had, like I said, they'd made some efforts to start. So and I had to pick up the pieces and get a program accredited. And of course the dilemma was California was so clinical at the time, which is not exactly my forte, or not my highest interest. So we worked with a great group of people, Margaret Tynan, John Garcia, Pam Marcus, and Chuck Floyd, and we built a curriculum that was sort of a mixture. You couldn't even use the word generalist in California then, even though that's what the program was in Washington, where I'd been. But to have a program that tried to prepare people for different levels of practice.
Were you always successful in your endeavors?
You know that's a funny question.
Yes.
Of course not. Now what can I think of? Because every job has failures.
So what are some of the obstacles that you encountered?
Well.
And how did you deal with them? Well, you just mentioned one about generalist.
Generalist versus clinical. And if you want to do community and you want to do social change and social policy, it was not as many forces to support that. And then, well, when you're ahead of a social work program, well, who's harder to work with, a group of social workers or a group of social work faculty? And you're smiling because you know exactly what I'm talking about. So organizing with NASW was social workers, and many of them are fantastic. Some of them are both fantastic and a pain at the same time, but challenging because and they're a great group of people. So that there were many obstacles, many things we couldn't do as much as we wanted to. I can't think of like a big failure, but things that just never happened because you couldn't get there.
So from those experiences, including the things that didn't necessarily work, how would you convey to up-and-coming people how they could have the kind of career that you've had, which is one filled with great success and can progress from one level to another and so forth? How would you want to help them process your experiences to their own situation? What words do you have for the up-and-comers?
That's hard. And I suppose I've been doing that all the way along, especially when I'm in the university. You're always encouraging somebody to do something or go ahead and try it, working with students, but with colleagues. Setting example is important, I think, rather than telling someone else what to do. You know, come with me is better. I just have to, people need to figure, would like people to figure out what it is they want to do and then work on how to do it and what kind of colleague, what kind of backup, what kind of support do they need, because you can't do much alone. You always have to work with other people.
The most satisfying, what would you say are the most satisfying experiences you've had?
They always go together with difficulty, but so I would say the NASW, working as staff with NASW and get the things going to get it, have it organized, they work effectively, get ready for such a wonderful follow-up as Jan Lee Wong to move it from there. The work with the graduate program that to have an actual MSW program in an area that really needed and appreciated it with agencies looking for it. This isn't exactly answering your question, but I'm reminded of a very wonderful experience I just had recently. I'm retired, have been retired for 10 years now. The university has a new president, and for some reason I went to the installation ceremony, and the head of the faculty senate was introduced to give his speech, and as soon as he started to speak, I recognized he had one of my faculty that I had brought in and who would never have, I couldn't get him to go to the Senate or things like that. Here he had become the faculty senate, president of the faculty senate, giving one of his wonderful presentations. So that was a very exciting moment.
Indeed, indeed. I can imagine. You're one of the few people that have had both volunteer and staff experiences in NASW in very responsible positions,
That's
not
true.
just as a member of a committee. What would you say are the differences and maybe what's more fun in one arena and the other? But you're one of the few people that can comment on
And being both a volunteer
and because you had lots of positions nationally.
That's
and
right.
on the state as a
I was on the
volunteer.
national board and
You were
even
the treasurer at one point, as I recall.
That's right. Good memory. Well, it is a little different. As a volunteer, you can always walk away. Not after you've taken on a job like being a board treasurer, and you can succeed. I remember having a big argument with Chauncey Alexander, who was this fantastic executive director, and about it. It was a finance thing. It was something stupid. It was on the budget. He came back the next day and said I was right, and wow, I did it. That's a great accomplishment, because he probably didn't say that very often. But you had freedom. I mean, you are there voluntarily, means you can leave voluntarily. It's all on you to be responsible. When you're employed, you got some headaches. You got to deal with those headaches. You can't walk away from it. Sometimes you have to take a walk.
Yeah, and you're also in the position of having to be guided by the policy set by volunteers who often have very limited understanding of the difficulties faced by staff. And so how would you say that the field of social work, as well as the political, the social, and economic contexts have changed during your career?
Oh. That's a very long period of time and a lot of changes. We were much smaller. We were we were, as a profession, not as not politically involved as we are today, where there's a much wider horizon. Obviously, we developed a lot of clinical practice, which is in the office talking to people, as different from Jane Addams' example. Community organization specifically, it goes somewhere else. It isn't so much a strong part of the profession as it is people develop those skills and practice them, but with other organizations, usually. Of course, the politics of the funding is just a whole different world from when we started. It's just a big world of funding from federal, state, local, working with a lot more people in public agency practice. In this part of the country, the private agencies don't have many social workers.
So, I mean, your career does span a number of years in which there were dramatic changes from you came just before the Kennedy administration all the way through, at some point, George W. Bush's
Right.
administration to, very different. So, what did you observe about the profession's efforts to accommodate to this increasingly conservative?
That's a wonderful question that comes from someone like you. I should save that and ask you that question. But we have accommodated, and the money flow has a lot to do with how we accommodate, because how the money comes in is how practice adapts itself to how to get something done. Because how do you hire people? How do you pay social workers to do something? So the way the money flows is quite different. More public, a lot more public agency, and we had it, but it's very dominant now. Very little private practice, private agency practice.
Yeah. If you, what do you think are the issue that social work should be addressing now that it perhaps is not paying sufficient attention to?
For a minute, let me go back to your last question. Okay. Some of the changes, the civil rights movement change was very important change, and the women's movement, I think, had a lot of impact on us. Remember when I started, there were very few men in social work, but they were in leadership positions. The leadership was still all men, even in social work. So that's been a huge change in our profession and in the way the decisions are, how the decisions are made and who is involved. It's very different in that sense. And as social workers are involved at more levels of government, are running for offices, are doing a lot of those things. It's not the macro practice in agencies, but they're getting involved in other ways. The big social work caucus in Congress and having a couple of senators who are social workers, that's right. all happened. Right. Now I forgot the other question.
What is social work not paying enough attention to? Right now?
I haven't changed in my thinking about that. I still think we should do more community development, working with people in the community, with the organizations of the community. And there's so many ways to do it. You can do it in agencies. Since retirement, I'm doing League of Women Voters and child care program, and and the local party politics, there are other ways that people can get involved and do more. And I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to see social workers get more interested in these public policy things.
In those activities that you're now engaged in as a retired person, do you always make sure people know you're a social worker and that what you bring to the table are social work skills and knowledge? Or do you think that's important?
Well, the only place I think I have that has been known and it is probably relevant is where I go and do childcare with children who are in where the parents are in counseling, but I'm taking care of children. So I go back to the very early things that I learned with these little kids, which are wonderful. In other places, no, I don't do as, I probably could do more, but I don't say a lot about, I'm a social worker and this is why. They learn.
If you could do anything over differently, is there anything that stands out for you that you would do differently?
Well, I've learned a lot more about managing people, and that I learned the hard way, and I would do some of that differently in many of the situations, because managing people is complicated, and sometimes your own desires or things that you want to accomplish can get away with, can get in the way of some of the best practices of helping other people to do things. So I think I would do something different there. I don't think I would change anything in terms of my focus of what I saw was important and where I might go. I think I'm fairly satisfied.
Well, that's great, and that kind of plays off to the second part of that question, and that is, what from your experiences could be helpful to people who are coming along, such that when they reach some period of longevity in the profession, they have that kind of feeling that they are essentially satisfied with what their practice has been, or what they feel good about their work in the profession.
Well, I would suggest that they do a lot of sharing. I would suggest they do something I didn't do enough of, and that is writing. Write their thoughts, write more about what they're doing, do a lot of writing. I sort of let that slide. I did a little, but not very much. And I think that would help people to reflect on what they're doing and why. Do
you think of doing any writing now? Because I recall you being a very good writer.
I probably could, but I didn't. No, I'm not writing. I'm not writing now. I'll explain.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that we haven't covered about your career, especially that could be interesting and informative to people who are coming along now in a very different
one
world?
thing back earlier when I didn't work in civil rights struggle was important to me. That when I was starting as an MSW and the civil rights movement was starting, and during the years I was at Special Service for Groups. We had a social worker named Rex Reagan who organized the NASW Civil Rights Committee, and the whole movement. I had friends who went to Selma. This whole effort to bring some kind of equity into the world, but into the profession as well, is very important, and I think we still can do more of that.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Because you certainly have had a rich, rewarding, and significant career.
Social Work Hall of Distinction. I was involved very early in that. And someone invited me, and my role early in it, when I went on to the committee, probably the first year, or that there was really an organization, and Jim Carles is the one that pushed this. And if you know Jim Carles, if he had his eye set on something, it was going to happen, because he was persistent and pushed, and he got this thing going, and got me involved very early. And I think it's great to recognize people, but it also has some political ramifications. I mean, it's where do the people come from? And one of them, of course, is northern and southern state. And I think I should mention some of it, because going to Sacramento, which Los Angeles people think of as north, well, that's the center of the state, actually. But the hall was started with people around USC, Southern California, and the focus was there. And several of us worked to make it statewide, and it now has become that, and it's being done that way. But I'd like to mention Simon Dominguez, and he and I worked together, especially in the beginning. Name isn't coming to me now. Several others, and worked to make sure we set up a Northern Committee for a while, and met separately to talk about how, who to nominate and how to be involved, so that we were involved, because everybody in the North couldn't go down all the time to USC. Eventually, someone from Berkeley got active, and I think that helped to get SC administration more active in it too, because they have now made it a statewide effort, which is I'm very happy about. But we did have to make some effort, and it may have to continue that at some point. To do that.
Well, it's interesting. There is the north-south divide, which I remember so well when I was here. But you also have experience in the valley, and that was always an area that neither north or south often knew hardly anything
pays any attention
about, or paid any attention to, or gave a damn about. So you've had all of that, and I think that you're richer as a social worker for it. And I think it says to other people, particularly younger people, social work is different in different parts of the state of California, and it's very different in parts of the country, which is certainly why I ended up in several different states, because it's just not the same entity, and you'll like some of it more from one place or another. So you need to take a little risk and move someplace else, up into the Cascade Mountains of eastern Washington. And that a lot of people say, no, I'm not mobile, I can't. And you short circuit your own career by not taking the bull by the horn.
And we are very diverse.
So is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. I think those are the main things.